and sort of the takeaways from Silicon Valley on how to do that. My hope, though, is really not that Bangalore, and I should say, I am the son of somebody from Bangalore. So even though I'm an ABCD, I'm totally born and raised in the United States. My dad was born and raised in Bangalore, went to IIT Madras, then went to the United States for his PhD, dropped out, married my mom, and had me. So I was born and raised in the United States, and so I'm coming back. And my hope, actually, is not that Bangalore will be as good as Silicon Valley, but really that Bangalore will disrupt Silicon Valley. And really that Silicon Valley will be learning from India in the next 20 years, not the other way around. And how India is going to manifest creating its own unicorns will look differently than how the US has. But this talk is going to be focusing on some of the lessons from the Valley on building billion-dollar businesses. Okay? So, we'll start off, let me give an introduction about myself. So my background is, I grew up in Silicon Valley, went to Stanford, did a bachelor's and master's in industrial engineering. I worked at 2 Kleiner Perkins startups. One was a complete failure, but raised $100 million, raised a ton of venture capital, and completely failed. And then the other was very, very unsexy. It was in the expense report management space, and that went public. And then I worked at McKinsey, and then I worked in venture capital for 6 years. And I got an MBA, 14 had been acquired, and CB Insights put out some rankings of the top programs based on funding rates. And that's what Alchemist is famous for, is getting very high funding rates for the companies that go through. So now we're going to talk about the bulk of what we're going to address today, is this notion of building a billion-dollar company. And Archimedes has this famous principle that give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I can change the world. And it goes back to there's this idea, really, that Amit was bringing up with, the hard thing about hard things is written by Ben Horowitz. And Ben is famous for saying it takes as much effort to build a company that will fail or be mediocre as it does to build one that will succeed. So you might as well build one that's going to succeed. Because even going down the path of trying to settle for something small is still going to be a ton of work. Whether you're doing an SME, in fact, it'll probably be more work than building something that'll be a billion-dollar company. The entrepreneurial path is not one where there's an easy path. So if you're going to go down this route, we might as well go big. And the difference really in building a billion-dollar company versus a million-dollar company is not the effort. It's not how hard you work. Okay? The difference is in thinking about how you architect your business to have the ability to break out. Most ideas are great ideas. It's very rare that I hear an idea and I say that's a categorically bad idea. Okay? The issue is just that you have a certain runway on which you need to take off. And if you get to that runway and you haven't taken off, then that's the end. And that runway is cash, that runway is time. And so really it's around architecting things to make sure you're going to take off. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And really, what we're looking for, these are some of the billion-dollar venture-backed companies that have come out of the United States. And what's phenomenal here is that you have businesses that have a fraction of the GDP. It's 0.2% of the GDP of the United States is responsible for 20% of the GDP today, in terms of these are small investments that became these huge companies that now are 1/5 of the US economy. And so we're going to try and think about, what are the traits that make something become a billion-dollar business. As everybody knows, we call these things in the United States unicorns. I don't know why we call them unicorns, because it implies that they're fake. And they're real. They're very real. They're done by very real people. And really, Amit, who's up here, is really where the rubber hits the road. That's the true entrepreneur. But these aren't, there's something very dangerous about trying to glorify everything as being unreachable. These are just, but the nomenclature is a unicorn. And if you look at the unicorns, sorry, the resolution on the slides isn't the best, but if you look at the unicorns over history, in general, there's 4 produced every year. So every year, there are 4 venture-backed companies that become worth a billion-dollar company, if you look at it at steady state and correct for fake unicorns. But 4 real billion-dollar companies. Okay. The key insight here is that if you're going to build a company that's going to be worth $1 billion, you cannot architect it in a way where you're growing linearly. You have to grow exponentially, right? The difference between something growing linearly is, this is linear, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just incremental addition every year. And multiplicatively, or exponential growth is 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. Okay? And so the question is, are you architecting your engine to grow multiplicatively in value versus additively, versus just at a fixed increment amount? And to grow 100x, to go from 10 million to $1 billion, you need to double in valuation, or triple in valuation effectively every 2 years, and you'll grow by 100x in 10 years. Okay? So just to make this clear, this is the growth of the internet, right? We post it on the y-axis and it's on an exponential scale. It looks like nothing's really changed. That curve starts in 1966. It goes up to 2001. It looks like it's a steady curve. But if I plotted that on a linear graph, it would look like this. It's the same data points, but on a linear graph, it looks like something crazy happened in the late 90s where everything just took off. Okay? But the reality is that it was actually growing at a fairly steady pace. It was just growing at an exponential, on an exponential path. And similarly, if you architect your businesses to be growing on an exponential path, you'll have these huge things that look from a linear world like you're growing on the curve of a knee, but it's just following architectural principles where it's growing multiplicatively. Okay? What that means in principle is that if you are, this is another way of looking at this, but if you're tripling in value year over year, you get to $1 billion in 5 years, and then if you're doubling in value, it takes 10 years. But effectively, you need to be growing at a certain growth. Actually, it's 4x, and 4x gets you there in 5 years. Okay, but you have to be, the basic thing is that you need to be growing at a multiplicative rate. So the question is, how do we do that? And everybody knows the difference between different types of growth. So what we're going to talk about is just drivers for exponential growth. How do you think about building things that can grow exponentially? The first driver, and this is basic VC 101. So what VCs are going to be looking for when they look at business plans. And the first driver is just your margins. Okay, the reason why, so if I am going to sell Ras Malai on the street, and I sell Ras Malai for, it costs me 50 cents to make a Ras Malai, and I sell it for $1. I make enough profit to make one more set of Ras Malai. That makes sense, right? So at 50 cents, I sell it for $1, I make 50 cents, I can sell another one for $1, I make 50 cents. I'm growing at a steady clip. Does that make sense? Every time I make that sale, I grow at 1x. If I up that to, if I go to Kalaba, or wherever the fancy part of town is, and instead of charging $1, I sell that for $1.50. The fixed costs are the same. My margins went up to 67%. So I sell it for $1.50, it costs me 50 cents. I suddenly have $1 of profit. I can make 2 Ras Malais. I'm going to sell those 2 Ras Malais for $3, it costs me $1, I make $2 in profit. And I'm growing suddenly on an exponential curve. So just that shift from 50% to 67% margins allows me to grow at 2x the rate. Okay? And every incremental percentage in your gross margins has a nonlinear impact on your growth. This is why, if I can get to 75% margins, I can grow 3x. And this is why, as this gets to, this is why venture capitalists love software. Software basically has no fixed cost, no variable cost versus hardware. And it's exactly because of this principle. You can then control your fate just by the very sale of your goods can allow you to get on that multiplicative curve. So the first thing is just choose business models where you're highly sensitive to the gross margins, and that is why software has ruled the world, and why all the VCs talk about software being the world. Okay, and that's usually why hardware tends to be a more difficult game to play. Okay. The second is to follow is that you need to be building a business fundamentally that's riding a new technology curve, or at least to be able to answer the question, why couldn't you have done this business 5 years ago? And if you could have done that business 5 years ago, odds are that there's not a new technology that you're exploiting that has been opened up to allow you to build that business. So, so again, the reason why technology is so fantastic is that it follows an exponential curve. How many people know about Moore's Law? Do I need to explain? So Moore's Law is just this notion that every 18 months, the density of transistors doubles for the same price point, which is a very complicated way of saying you get twice the amount of compute power for the same dollar as you did 18 months prior. Everybody knows this when you buy a phone. When you go and you buy your next phone for the same price point, it has 2 to 4x the functionality. Okay? And so naturally, if you're exploiting a new technology, you can exploit an exponential growth curve. And we've seen this already with this is the growth of the internet and how that's grown linearly. It happens in any market where you have positive feedback loops. The reason why technology grows non-linearly is because the very tools that create the next technologies use those technologies as inputs for those tools. And so there's just this constant positive feedback loop, which is fantastic. Okay. And this is also why when you're building a business, VCs are always asking for how much better, faster, or cheaper are you? And you need to have something that's at least 10x better, faster, or cheaper. Why? Because if you're only 2x better, faster, or cheaper, just secularly, based on Moore's Law, in the next 18 months, technology will catch up. So even if you have an algorithm that's twice as fast, in 18 months, there'll be enough compute power to take care of that. So at least a 10x advantage gives you 4 years, 3 to 4 years of an advantage. Okay. I don't know if we want to get into this just for the sake of time, but what's even really cool is that Moore's Law is accelerating. So what's really fun in the Valley is you think about if Moore's Law extrapolates, what does that mean? And what that means is that by 2023, not too far from now, we should achieve human brain capability for $1,000 bucks. For $1,000, you can effectively have the compute power of the human brain. And this goes down to a penny in 2037, and I think it's a penny in 2059 for the whole human race. So if you extrapolate that, it becomes profound. Now, what's great about the reason why it's such a fantastic time to be an entrepreneur today is that you can start a company for literally 100th the cost that it took 10 years ago. So really $50,000 today is the equivalent of $5 million 10 years ago, because everything is a service. You can get all of your compute power as a service. Everything is less expensive. And at the same time, the companies that are breaking out, that are becoming winners, their revenue ramps are steeper than they were 10 years ago. So they're 4 to 6x steeper in terms of if you look at how quickly companies are growing. This is in the enterprise software space. You can see Slack took, to get to 10 million of revenue, it was almost 6 times quicker than what it took Box to get there. Slack famously went from launch to $1 billion valuation in 9 months. It was the shortest puberty period for a unicorn of any Silicon Valley company. And we haven't, you get that because of all the distribution and technology that Slack gets to exploit. And so a final way, and really this is just more of a thought exercise, I'm thinking about where is the engine of your value and what's the bottleneck for that engine? And how can you tweak that? Is it sales? And how do I tweak that so that I can grow my sales multiplicatively? And so all these are just a couple examples. But the other one that is very common is network effects. And network effects are just where you architect your product so that the product becomes more valuable as users expand. So the very use of the product, the customers themselves, creates more value into the products. The classic example here could be Skype, or WeChat, or WhatsApp. If I technologically ripped off Skype, and I create Raviite, and I tell everybody, use Raviite, it's technically identical. The heuristic here is if you have a technically identical alternative, why would people still use Skype? Well, because nobody's going to use Raviite because nobody's on Raviite. It doesn't matter about the technology. What matters is the network effect, that everybody's on Skype. And that's when you've built something that will endure even things that are attacking it. The value of that network grows exponentially. And you can measure this in different ways. There's Metcalfe's law. If I'm the only one on Skype, I can do 0 calls. If there's 2 people, I can do 1 call. If there's 3, you can do 3, and it keeps growing up. If there's 4, you can do 6. So that scales exponentially. There's also Reed's law, where you can do it as a function of the number of subgroups. But the takeaway is the same. So this is the classic example of a beautiful network effect. This is Facebook, and the red line is the number of monthly active uniques on Facebook, and the green line is what you would project Metcalfe's law to be. So if you applied Metcalfe's law, that's the value line you can see, and the dots are Facebook's revenue. Isn't that amazing? So the users grow linearly, and the revenue is growing exponentially. Just to juxtapose that, this is Angry Bird. How many people have played Angry Bird? Okay, so Angry Bird's a beautiful business. Nothing wrong with Angry Bird, okay? But Angry Bird is a phenomenon. It is not a repeatable game, even though it's a game. It's, there's no network effect at play with Angry Bird. If I play Angry Bird, that does not make your experience of Angry Bird any better. Okay, so the growth of Angry Bird's revenues are directly correlated with the number of people that have used or downloaded the apps. It doesn't go up. Your experience or your value doesn't go up. Whereas with Facebook, here on your left, you can see the monthly active uniques. On the right, the value for every individual user is going up. Okay, so those network effects can occur in many ways. You can get network effects based on communication, so Skype or WeChat or WhatsApp. You can have network effects based on marketplaces, like eBay, or I don't know what would be a good example in India, but a marketplace where you have supply and demand, and that there's liquidity. You can have APIs or operating systems or platforms. So the beautiful thing about using something like Apple is that it combines all 3. With Apple, they have the hardware device with the platform and the apps. And we can speak a lot about a lot of different things. I know I'm out of time, and so there's a lot of different heuristics then on different things that you can do. And that's just a short teaser, I suppose. But if you get these things right, life can be really beautifully fun as an entrepreneur, because every little piece of input you put in terms of your work and your attention, you have a multiplicative effect back, and you have really the wind against you building up a business. And if you get some of these basic things wrong, no matter how hard you work, you won't necessarily reap the rewards from just a couple of simple basic decisions. And so my blessing and hope is that the next big unicorns, as we've heard today from Dr. Apur and others, will come out of this room. And if I can help catalyze that, please reach out. So that's it.